There is a moment in the life of a nation when money, the very essence of exchange, ceases to have meaning, and that moment arrived in Zimbabwe in the year 2008. It was a financial apocalypse, a collapse of value so absolute and so obscene that the numbers stopped making sense and began to blur into astronomical fantasies. The hyperinflation crisis in Zimbabwe stands as the second worst episode in recorded human history, exceeded only by the collapse of the Hungarian Pengo after the Second World War. The architects of this economic implosion were not foreign invaders, but a homegrown government, a regime that chose political survival over economic reality. The story begins with the land. After a brutal war for independence, the country had been run by President Robert Mugabe, a revolutionary hero turned authoritarian autocrat. In 2000, facing increasing political pressure, Mugabe initiated a violent, chaotic program to seize land from white commercial farmers. It was meant to redress colonial injustices, but in reality, it was a cover for a campaign to dismantle his political opposition. The seizure of farms was brutal, often involving malicious beating or killing white farmers and their workers. The result was catastrophic. The agricultural sector, the engine of the Zimbabwean economy, collapsed overnight. Production of tobacco, corn, and beef plummeted by over 70%. The world had stopped investing in a country that was effectively stealing its own assets. International aid dried up, sanctions were imposed, and the government's coffers were empty. Mugabe and his cronies were faced with a choice: cut spending and reform, or print money to pay the bills. They chose the latter. It was the easiest option, and it would prove to be the most fatal. The central bank, run by a controversial figure named Gideon Gono, began running the printing presses at full tilt. But printing money without economic growth is a fool's errand. It merely dilutes the value of every other note in circulation. As the money supply multiplied, prices began to rise. At first, it was slow. A loaf of bread that cost $1 now costs $2. But then, the spiral accelerated. By 2007, the inflation rate was over 1,000%. By 2008, it was a mind-bending 200 million%. The figures became so large they are impossible to visualize. The government was forced to issue a $100 trillion note, a banknote that was worth less than a single American dollar on the black market. The irony was bitter. A street sweeper in Harare would be paid $1 trillion in the morning, but by the time they walked to the shop to buy lunch, inflation had destroyed the value of their wages. People carried their salaries in wheelbarrows. The story goes that a man was robbed at gunpoint, but the thieves gave the money back because it was too heavy to carry. Grocery stores ran out of goods because suppliers would not accept the currency. The shelves were empty. In desperation, people reverted to a barter economy, trading clothes for food or gasoline. The wealthy traded in foreign currency, pounds, and euros, while the poor were left to starve. The currency was literally dying. The government attempted to stop the bleeding by issuing a new set of notes, redenominating the currency by lopping off zeros. They would issue a new $100 note that was worth the same as 100 million old dollars. But the measure failed almost instantly. The old notes were simply thrown away because they were worth less than the toilet paper used to print them. The human cost was devastating. The unemployment rate soared past 80%. Millions of Zimbabweans, the doctors, lawyers, and engineers who had built the nation, fled to South Africa, Botswana, and the United Kingdom. The country's infrastructure was crumbling. Hospitals had no medicine because they couldn't afford to import it. The government's own salaries were worthless. Soldiers and police officers were forced to set up roadblocks demanding bribes just to buy food. By 2009, the situation was so desperate that the government finally surrendered its authority over the currency. It legalized the use of foreign currency, officially dollarizing the economy. The Zimbabwean dollar was effectively dead, officially suspended and relegated to the scrap heap of history. The crisis was a monstrous lesson in economic mismanagement. It showed that a government can print all the money it wants, but it can never print wealth. The only thing that creates value is production, the sweat of the worker and the soil of the farm. When you destroy that, you destroy everything. Robert Mugabe's regime was ultimately overthrown in a coup in 2017, but the scars of the hyperinflation era remain visible in the empty factories, the brain drain of talent, and the palpable sense of lost potential.